Hi, I'm Walt Wheeler, Executive Director of the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation, and we're here today recording another in our Legacy series, interviews of past Grandmasters of the Grand Lodge of Michigan. With us here today is Most Worshipful Brother Lary R. Smith, who served as Grandmaster in the year 2003-2004. Larry, thank you for being with us today.
Very pleased to be here.
We're going to start at the very beginning. Where were you born?
Well, I was born in Plymouth, Michigan. My father had built a house for his new bride in 1939, and I came along in 1942. It's interesting that that's still listed as my address.
Oh, very
But I was
good.
born in Plymouth, raised Plymouth. Kind of makes it awkward when you're trying to come up with those security questions on things, because what was your first high school? Plymouth. Where were you born? Plymouth. Where were you? Etc., etc. But they're all my life.
Well, why don't you tell me a little bit about your mom and dad?
Mom was Dorothy Smith. She was an active member in the Plymouth chapter of Eastern Star. My father was active in the Plymouth Rock Lodge. She was a homemaker. Dad was working originally for his father in a kind of corner restaurant, little bitty smoke shop initially, and then got bigger to a sandwich shop, and there's all sorts of tales he tells about that with my grandfather there in Plymouth. During the war, he worked for a neighbor of ours as a auditor in a factory in Plymouth, and eventually when Granddad said he didn't want that was Clifford Glenn Smith. By the way, I'm about the fourth or fifth generation of Masons in our family. But Glenn Smith had decided that he didn't want to run the restaurant anymore, asked Clifford Smith, my father, if he wanted to carry on, and Dad's comment was, no, I don't think so. So he went back to eventually being comptroller of this factory in Plymouth. And I forget when exactly he retired. The day we're recording this is his 99th birthday. He is celebrating a few months past his 75th year as a Mason. You're going to get to that later. But, I have a sister by the name of Jan Ellen, and I guess I should comment on names. My middle name is R. Raymond, named after somebody back in my mother's family. But my first name is Lary, so I have invariably been known as Lary 1R, which a number of ladies heard as Lary 1 Arm, and would get mad at their husbands for saying, why are you insulting him, calling him Lary 1 Arm? And finally, when they'd see me, they'd say, he has 2 arms. What are you talking about? So that was interesting, but okay. So Dad was this restaurateur and then controller for this company. He was 19 years the secretary of Plymouth Rock Lodge. And Mom was a very good householder. But somewhere along the line, they got the idea for travel. And I remember being, 6 or 7 was our first travel, because when you're in the restaurant business, you can't really take time off. So this was a big thing, to take maybe a week's trip sometime. And we all enjoyed it. My mother died in 1988. And at that time, I had been thinking about moving downriver, but Dad said, well, this kind of empty place here, why don't you come and stay there? So I moved in and occupied myself with keeping busy with all sorts of activities.
So tell us a little more about your sister. She's your younger sister.
She's 3 years my younger. She, I think I probably did all of the stuff brothers are supposed to do to sisters. I'm not sure. But she was married to a Navy man, had 2 daughters, and they are now married and have 4 grandkids she has. My sister's husband died in about 95 or thereabouts, and so she's been taking care of the grandkids ever since. So she regularly goes back and forth to Columbus, Ohio to visit with them because they're all in Columbus. She never got involved in any Masonic activities. And at the time that I was growing up, Plymouth Rock had both DeMolay and Rainbow, but at different times it disappeared and gone elsewhere. So I was not a member of DeMolay and just came straight into Masonry. But sister still lives in the area, see her on a regular basis.
Good. Tell us about some childhood memories. Anything really stand out? You mentioned the trips. Anything else?
Well, I guess one of the strange ones was that during the war, Dad, meat was hard to get, so he grew rabbits. And I remember, at least I'm told that I remember, watching the rabbits snip off the top of the carrots and whatever, and so I'd go and pull these carrots out of the ground and got a good spanking for that. Also remember saying, please don't kill the bunny. But by golly, those bunnies came up with some really neat hoods for our winter clothing. So they helped more than food.
Probably pretty warm.
Yeah.
So
I attended Plymouth High School. When I started into the high school, they said, you'll never make it into college. Well, I guess I proved that counselor wrong and ended up, I guess I was 3rd in my class because there were 2 that happened to have all A's and I had an A minus, so I ended up 3rd in a class of about 350. Was a member of, I think, the chess club, and we didn't have computers back then, so it couldn't have been that, but various activities. Band, was in the Plymouth Symphony for a while.
what did you play?
In the symphony, I played bassoon. In the band, I played saxophone, clarinet, and bassoon.
Do you still play?
I still have the saxophone. As my father says, it's probably green with mold because it's been sitting there for a long while. No, I haven't played in a while, even though I wished I would get it out.
So you mentioned you've spent basically your whole life in Plymouth. So you grew up in Plymouth in the same household and
Yeah.
went to grade school, junior high, and high school in Plymouth?
Same building as my father had gone.
Okay. So after high school, you went to college right away?
Yes. Yes. I thought, gee, this is really neat, math and science. Let me find some place that has math and science. And I guess one of my mentors I'd say would be my uncle, who was an electrical engineer. So I thought engineering would be a really neat thing to get into. Kalamazoo College, not Western, but Kalamazoo College had a program that was a 3-2 program that you'd spend 3 years with them and then 2 years at the University of Michigan, graduating with a degree in engineering. So I thought, well, that's what I want. Started in. That's not what I ended up. During my sophomore year, as a assignment to earn some money for my keep, I was assigned to a Yugoslav professor in the physics department who had just come in, was on one of those work visas, and he would work his way for the year there at Kalamazoo College. He could speak no English when we started out. With his Serbian or Yugoslav German dictionary and my German English dictionary, we'd figure out all sorts of things. But there were times that I remember him talking about the centrifugal forces and the centripetal forces. I was, besides helping him, I was also in charge of the lab. So I had my peers, a year younger than me, that were the students. And it was very interesting in that here I was doing something entirely different than I thought I would by working with kids, my age of course, but going over what the lessons would be with the professor and what the things were in the lab and the homework, and just became the, wow, this is really great. And so by the end of the sophomore year, I decided, I don't think I want engineering, I think I want teaching. So that's where I switched from into being, let's be a teacher, let's be a physics teacher. And I was for a while. Kalamazoo also had an interesting experience in that they were one of the first colleges to institute a year abroad. Well, actually they were on 4 quarters, so it was only supposed to be 2 quarters abroad. I was having a miserable time with foreign languages, so thought, well, let me go try an English-speaking place. Found out that there was only 2 that said I could come for less than a year, and they were both in the city of Glasgow, Scotland. When I got there at the University of Glasgow, they said, oh, we thought you meant 2 semesters. You're here for 2 semesters, aren't you? No, just 2 terms. Well, our terms are 9 months long. You're going to be here that long. So I started out on my own, so to speak, in that it was other than what I thought it to be. This was the year of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And I can say that living in a building where I think there was one other American, but there were students from other parts of the world there besides England and Scotland. And the comment as to, why does your country want to start World War III? It gave me a lot of chance to think about what our position is, who we are as Americans. And I'm to this day so glad that I was able to be involved in that and had the experience of, I hate to say, of having to have the Cuban Missile Crisis go on. I'm sure there's many people that don't even remember what that was. But that was in October of '62, where we blockaded Cuba. Almost started a world war. There was time between semesters, about a month's time between semesters. So over the Christmas holidays, I spent it in Ireland and England. And in the spring, Easter break of, again, about a month, used my Eurail card to travel all over the then accessible parts of Europe. I never went into anywhere near East Germany. I thought, although I guess that was before the wall, but I was all the way from northern Norway all the way down to the tips of Spain, Portugal to, well, I don't think we could get into Yugoslavia, but Italy at least. Everywhere in between, still getting my, oh gee, I like to travel. And I guess I'm still doing that today.
That had to be a great experience for a young man.
Well, it was very interesting.
I'm assuming also your time going to school in Scotland is where you developed your love for that country, because I know you've been back there many, many times.
I told the people, or when I went over, there was a family from our community of Plymouth whose relatives lived in the area of Glasgow. There was also a family that was stationed over there, shall we say, working for boroughs. And so I would go on a fairly regular basis to see both of them. And you're right, I did develop a real great love for the country and said, I will be back. And so 33 years later, I did make my first trip back. And there's been times that I've been over twice a year. It's usually been every other year since then.
Very good. You mentioned Kalamazoo College and the University of Glasgow. I know you had some additional education beyond that. I think you went to the U of M's arch enemy for a while.
Oh, yes. That came out very easily when I was visiting as Grandmaster to the Grand Lodge of Ohio. And my good friend, the Grandmaster there, said, would you bring remarks from Michigan? So I said, I'm from that little state north of here. You all know that little state. And we were meeting in, I don't think it was Columbus, but near there. And I said, but let me tell you that I did graduate my master's degree from a school not more than 30 miles from here. So the original boos when I started talking about the U of M immediately turned into yay when they found out that yes, I have my master's degree from the Ohio State University. I have also attended Eastern, Western, Wayne State. I've taught at Wayne State in Detroit. A number of them.
A lot of education. Let's go a different way here. And I guess by many of our standards, you're kind of a newlywed.
Oh, yes.
So tell us how you met your wife, Barb.
Well, it's interesting. She and her husband, Bob Howard, Barbara, and Bob Howard, joined the sail club that I was a member of. They joined in 1986 and were very active in the cruises and so forth that our sail club was doing. We would have at least a 1 week, sometimes a 2 week summer cruise, and at times we had 25 plus boats. I'm sorry to say this year we had 3, but things change. So I first met them in '86, and as she puts it, but she was already taken, so she wasn't available. There was 2 times in my life that I was about ready to sell the boat, Venture, which is a 33-foot sailboat. And both times I heard the comments of a mortician friend of mine who said he doesn't tell his clients, but he tells the relatives of his clients, don't do anything for a year, you never know what might happen. The first time I thought I'd sell it, there was an ad in our newsletter, our club newsletter, for a guy living in Plymouth, Michigan, who likes to sail, but his wife detests the water, so he wanted to go sailing. So for the next 17 years, he was my sailing companion. It ended in 2005 when he told me that, well, I want to spend more time with my wife and grandkids. I'm glad he did, because within a year his wife did die of cancer. So, okay, I don't have anybody to sail with. In August of 2005, Bob Howard passed away in the middle of the night. So, Barb didn't have anyone to sail with. So that spring, when we were trying to put together the plans for the 2006 sailing outing, I made comments that, well, I don't have anybody to sail with. She says, well, I'll sail with you. Her comment was, I probably said, well, I guess we could, which she later found out, not in a million years. Actually, inside of me, I thought, what in the world is it going to be like to have a female on this boat? I know you never allowed women on the boat in the 17th, 18th, 19th centuries. They're bad luck. Except she's a good sailor, so okay. As time went on that year, I kept thinking, well, who shall I have sail with me? I could go with, no, I don't want them. No, I don't want them. Don't want them. So later on, I did tell Barb, you were the least objectionable of all of my alternatives.
And that went over good, did it?
Oh, yes, that was. She kept saying, he's new to this. But okay. So I did ask her to, well, let's drive up to a port that she was in charge of to look for where's the ice cream, where's the swimming pools, where's the whatnot, and a port that I would do. And so that summer was a cruise up into Lake Huron. And we passed under the Blue Water Bridge, past the, Fort Gratiot Lighthouse, and out there ahead we saw the Pride of Baltimore, which is one of the tall ships with 17 sails. Just beautiful. So I had my camera out, and Barb had gone up on the bow of the sailboat to get a better picture, even though it was maybe 5 miles away. How far, we don't know how far it was. And I was taking pictures also, and I looked at Barb, and I felt Cupid's arrow. I don't know how else to call it, anything. It was just, my goodness. It wasn't until a couple of weeks later when we were on another sailing that we finally admitted our feelings to each other. So after 65 years of being a bachelor, being a very active bachelor, I guess, we were married. We were going through later in that same cruise where we had decided where we kind of loved each other. Well, let's see, could we have it on this date? No, we can't do it this date because we had limitations that I had a niece who was with child and wanted to make sure that the birth had happened so that the niece, and probably the child too, could be at the wedding. And Barb had a passport that expired in September, and so therefore she didn't want to get a passport in the name of Howard and then another one in the name of Smith. So that meant, here we had a limitation of June through August. So we picked out a date, called my niece, one with child, and said, how would the first Saturday in July be? She came back with, at 7 o'clock. Why? We'd never looked at the dates. 7707. Strange thing was when I went to talk to the minister, we were going to have her priest, my minister. She says, I've done this twice already. You're the bride. You decide whatever's going on. But I did talk to the minister, and he said, I'm sorry, I've got a 4 o'clock wedding that day, and I want them 3 hours apart, so you could either have it at 1 o'clock or 7 o'clock. So it was a wedding on 7707 at 7, and we were probably 7 minutes late. Church has a limited number of people, so we said, well, let's invite so-and-so. Well, why invite them? Well, they won't come. They live in Florida. Let's invite so-and-so. They won't come. They live in... There was very few who didn't show up. So we had a number from Scotland, we had people from Florida, we had people from the East Coast and from Midwest, and it was a big wedding, even though it was supposed to be a small one at 7707.
I thought you were going to tell me you invited 7 people.
We were thinking of how few could we be, and the place was packed. We had I guess I can state that it's a life-changing event. Things are entirely different. I have a new outlook on life, and okay, we'll just go it there.
I think it's great. Let's go back to your working life. What was the very first job you had?
In high school, I was a sewing machine repair person. There was a place in town that did that, and so I did a little bit of sewing machine repair. Since then, I haven't been able to fix my wife's machine, so I have forgotten all of that. But my real first job was in Warren Consolidated Schools as the physics and math instructor. The contract I signed for that is rather unusual because it says that I am hired pending application. So I went to an interview to talk with them, and they said, "You've got the job. Now would you please apply for it?" I was there a couple of years and then moved to the Livonia Public Schools, where I was the math, physics, and electronics instructor in 2 of their schools until the computer activities came along. We'll get to that in a bit, I think. And I became computer consultant for Livonia Public Schools, and when Livonia said, well, computers are a fad, we don't need to worry about them anymore, the people at Wayne County Intermediate School District asked me, would I please come and be the computer consultant for the entire Wayne County, except for Detroit, who of course does their own thing.
Did you go get special training in computers? How did you get your expertise in computers when they started?
Well, back at Kalamazoo, I think it was in 61, 62, they had a summer loan of a 1620 from IBM. And the machine just kind of, wow, what's this? Look at what it can do. Of course, it couldn't do much because you had to punch all sorts of cards and feed the cards in. Livonia Public Schools had, through a grant, had gotten a 1440 for student use, and for the first 5 years, very few students touched it. And part of my program was to get it going again with getting students to work with that computer. My experience was just in knowing about it, learning about it, being excited about it, and that goes back to this is after that, but 75 was when I went to Wayne County Schools, but it was in 1975 that I think it was one of the hobby electronics magazines, there was an article about an Altair, which was the first commercial computer kit that for, I forget what the price was, but you could build a computer that had something like 24 switches on the front of it, so you put the information in by switches, and you read it out by looking at the lights blinking at you, and it had 256 memory locations. Not K, not meg, just 256. To this day, I still have that computer, plus a couple others from that same era. And my wife has said, wow, she found a kit that if I were to assemble this kit, it would give me 1K of memory on a board that was this big. Things weren't quite like our little phones and so forth today. We've got a lot of things have changed since the mid-70s. So I just had the experience of it. Somewhere along the line, somebody told me, you really ought to have a computer course. So I thought, okay, I'll take a summer school class at Eastern Michigan in computers. I sounded the teacher by when she says, I'd like you to write out a program to create factorials. Well, factorials keep getting longer and longer and longer, but if you're using any of the known languages, it gets chopped off after a while. So I was coming up with, the printout was longer and longer with all these. How'd you do that? Machine language. How'd you do that? Well, it's simple. It's I forget what computer, 1130 or something like that. So I just learned it, and the next thing I knew, I'd already passed the class and now was working on a student records program for Eastern Michigan, which I hope they never continued using, but who knows. When I was in Warren Consolidated, I had a computer club, and we would take computer programs down to Wayne State. I would punch up the cards of what the kids did and submit them, and the next day they'd have their printouts and found out all of these errors, and so that means you got to go back again to do it, run through again. That student records thing that I'd had at Eastern, I thought, well, I think I've got an interesting way. So at Wayne State, I thought, let me try something. There's not much space on computer disks, but tape has a lot of space. So I was writing some routines, and people who said, while my program was running, these tape machines at Wayne State kept spinning all over the place. And all of a sudden, the master output tape did a rewind. And they said, that's not legitimate. We shouldn't have that happening. And so they called IBM out, and IBM said, we'll put a filter on so that it can never happen again. Since I didn't get anything back on my program, about 2 weeks later I submitted it again. This time I was called into the dean of the school, and they said, you have done something that IBM says could not be done on our computer. We have two options. Either you work for us and tell us how you did it, or never use Wayne State's computers again. Okay. So I never used Wayne State's computers again. I used GM's, I used Ford's, I used a number of other people. So my computer experience was just seat of the pants, shall we say.
And you still have a love for them today.
Oh, I still have a love for them.
Let's talk about some of your memberships and organizations, excluding Masonic. You mentioned your sailing club. Are there other organizations you're involved with?
Oh, yes. I'd say by about 76, 77, the person who was head of Wayne County's computer, me, Oakland County's, and Macomb County's computer things got together and said, we ought to have a statewide computer organization. And so formed an organization that's still in existence today. It's MAUCL, M-A-U-C-A-L. McCall, Massel, has all sorts of pronunciations. One of the things we did in the early bit was to say there's no proper pronunciation. For the first 9 years of the organization, I was the executive secretary, which meant I got to do all the books and tell the people how to do things. And I guess that's where organizationally things started happening with me, because we'd end up with about 6 people in the car going to the board meetings that had 9. We'd make the decision as to what was going to happen at the board meeting. And it was just very simple then to run the meeting, because we'd already decided what to do. There was a rival group in Michigan, which was the administrative computing, and I was working for Wayne County in the administrative department, which was MAEDS, MAIDS. I became a member of that, and over time was president of that organization in Michigan. It was associated with the national organization, AEDS, and that's the way we always pronounced it, because you didn't want to say I'm National AIDS, AEDS, and I became the president of that organization at one time. I was actively involved in other computer organizations in Michigan, and so computer was, I guess, my way of life. I was active in other organizations, if you're looking at that. I think maybe I mentioned that in Plymouth, as I'll say youngster, probably about age 5, I joined the church choir, the Cherub Choir, and I'm still a member of the church choir, same church, not the same choir, but the same church and its choir today. At the church level, I was ordained as a deacon and an elder of the Presbyterian Church in Plymouth. Was head of the worship committee when we were trying to decide what to do with a possibly errant pastor, but we got over that okay. Gads, lots of them. That I mentioned National AIDS. There was a national organization that Mauchel was associated with, and there was a national conference of NAUCAL, N-A-U-C-A-L.
Is that an acronym? What does that stand for?
National N-A-U, for the Users of Computer in a Learning somehow. I was the chair of that conference. That conference was a very interesting one because it was held in Toronto, which meant that I had to travel monthly to Toronto to see how things were going. I attend the meetings of this conference. And hey, that was kind of neat. I'm so glad to have worked for some people at Wayne County that respected the fact that as long as you have your name on it, Wayne County ISD, Wayne County RESA, that you're bringing stuff to other areas. So I was involved in that, and there was a national organization associated with Mauchel. And I thought, these two organizations, National AEDS and this national other one, ought to get together. I was a member of both, on the boards of both, actually president of one of them. So their thought was, there's an easy way of doing this. We'll have a 7-member panel to work out the consolidation. 3 from this organization, 3 from this organization, and Larry, because he's from both organizations. Worked fine. The successor organization is called ISTE. And at one time it had somewhere around 60,000 members.
Wow.
So I was president of that for a little bit. I had something go through my mind as to other activities, but we can go on.
All right. Well, let's move into the Masonic fraternity. I'm assuming you learned about the Masonic fraternity from your dad?
Sure did. Dad and Mom. There were all sorts of activities at Plymouth Rock Lodge, number 47, in Plymouth, Michigan. Lots and lots of stuff going on, and as a little kid, I would always be there for the dinners. I don't know whether dinners were associated with any degrees or whether they were just plain dinners, but it was fantastic to be there, and here were some really neat people. And as I grew up, I kept thinking, how come nobody's invited me to join? Something must be wrong. Not even my father is inviting me to join. I'd really like to be a member of this, but obviously I looked up what was available at that time. Oh, it's a secret organization. Okay, so they didn't ever tell me the secret was how to join. But so when my grandfather died, he was the second or third of, I think I'm the 5th generation in our family living in the Plymouth Westland area that were all Masons. when my grandfather died, they had a Masonic memorial for him. So here was a whole batch of Masons around, all of whom I knew. So I went up to the then senior warden and junior warden and said, "How do I join?" "Well, you just said the magic words." "I did?" "Yeah. We'll get you a petition." Now, since then, I've talked to the first signer who said he shouldn't have been. He should have gotten with my father to make sure that he was the first signer. But instead, this guy was the first signer, and my petition was taken into the lodge. My father, as I said, was 17 years, or 19 years, the secretary of Plymouth Rock Lodge. So there are a number of petitions in his stack, and they came in and shoved this other petition at the bottom of the stack. Needless to say, Dad was a little bit surprised.
I'd love to have seen the look on his face when he started reading that one.
Obviously, I don't know what kind of look on his face it was, but as I said, the first signer apparently felt that he probably should not have done that. He should have let Dad do it. I kind of did the same thing with Eastern Star, because after a while, I joined in, let's see, next year I'll be 40 years, so I joined in 74, Plymouth Rock Lodge. I'm a lifetime member, a prepaid member, but next year I'll be 40 years. When Mom was active in Eastern Star, she was, I think she handled all the star points, I'm not sure. She never was in the East. Dad, I'm not quite sure what he did. At that time, I think there was only 2 men in the whole organization, but no, I don't mean 2 male officers. And I'm sure he held at least one of those positions. Again, I had somebody stick it in, and both of them came back and about ready to paddle me for doing a second surprise of, "Why didn't you tell us you'd like to join?" You know, wanted to be a surprise. So I kind of was active, but one of those actives is when I was senior warden or junior warden, something like that in the lodge. I attended the Eastern Star meeting, and okay, so who's going to be the associate patron next year? "Oh, I can't do it. I can't do it. I can't do it." Larry can't do it because he's going to be a worshipful master at the same time. Finally, somebody said, "There's not much to it. He could be worshipful master and patron at the same time. Why not?" I did. It's something I don't recommend. There's a lot of work involved in that. I have attended, I think this year will be about my 42nd year as attending Grand Chapter, which comes each October. And I have enjoyed seeing the floor formations. I took my wife, Barb, to see what was going on one time during the afternoon session, which is open to the public. And she said, "No way do I want to be part of anything like that." So, okay, we'll just get along with it. I'm also sure she would have said, "No way would she have been my wife when I was Grandmaster," because of all the stuff going on.
You mentioned the Eastern Star. What other appendant and affiliated organizations do you belong to?
Well, let's see. There's Scottish Rite, York Rite. I'm past high priest of the Northville Union chapter. I'm a member of council and commandery in Northville. I'm a member of the York Rite College, Prince Edwin number 8. I was a member of Plymouth High 12 for a long while and past president of it a couple of times. And then when it got too small, it consolidated with the Redford Northwest. We have I think 9 members now, of which 3 still get out, and there's only 3 that get out, so I'm, whichever my turn is to head or second head or treasurer, and that's what I am now of that one. One that I've enjoyed is Allied Masonic Degrees, a member of it. I'm sure there's a number of others, but they don't seem to come to mind right now.
Of the appendant and affiliated organizations, which one do you get the most out of? Which one do you enjoy the most?
This is a strange answer because I kind of like chapter, but I also found that Barb loves to read, and so she read the Red Book as to what's going on and had a fit. How in the world can you be involved in such a sacrilegious organization? And I guess at times I have wondered, even in Masonry, as to whether we say we are for all people, and there's stuff in our ritual that doesn't seem to fit other religions. I had, during my year as deputy, I had a little committee of Jews and another committee of Muslims, trying to figure out what we might be able to do to make it more tolerable. And I think the answer they came up with is, if they were not open to, if they were orthodox in their beliefs, they couldn't be a member anyway. So don't worry about it. And that's the way I left it.
Kind of the precursor to today's diversity committee, probably.
Oh, yeah.
You've received many awards and honors over the years. Which ones stand out? Which ones had the most impact on you when you got them?
Well, probably the most flabbergasting one was being elected Grand Marshal. And you're laughing because you know what's coming next. And that was, I think Hagee had been elected as the new Grand Master, so I don't know if it was he or his predecessor that was asking me, do you accept the position of Grand Marshal? And without hesitation, I said, yes, I accept the position of Grand Master. Whoops, I mean Grand Marshal. I also said that I was willing to take on all of the stuff that came with being Grand Marshal. That was a very priding moment. Back in '92, I think it was, I became the Lodge Mason of the Year and the District Mason of the Year, and that was very proud. I was very proud of that. I was proud at being elected to any of the national organizations and state organizations, but I honestly think being elected Grand Master and being accepted by my peers was the highest honor I have received.
It's a huge honor.
Except when somebody said yes, and I guess I had to ask her twice because I forgot I asked her the first time.
Who are some of the older Grandmasters that you've known prior to your time in line?
Well, living in this area and being involved in Scottish Rite and York Rite here in this area, there were a number of them that were members. One of them that I particularly remember was Leonard Noshel. And Leonard Noshel was very interesting during my year of being a Grand Master, because it turned out we found that the jewel that I was wearing at the time, the jewel that's in the picture of me, was not the proper jewel. That Leonard had lost the jewel in Europe. And as I was Grand Master, the Grand Lodge of Michigan received a letter from the United Grand Lodge of England stating, we think we have something that belongs to you. They had found, probably at a pawn shop, the jewel that Noshel had left probably with some kind of an idea, well, if he didn't want it anymore, I guess I can take it. And his wife took it in to have it appraised, and the pawn shop person said, well, I'll need to look at it for a few days, because he knew precisely what it was, contacted Grand Lodge of England as to, she shouldn't have this, do we know anything about this? They contacted us, and for $1,000 we could have it back. Now the only question came was to, how do we get this expensive thing to Michigan? Oh, I have a way. I'll go get it. And I think that was, I made it in conjunction with a visitation to the Grand Lodge of England, Grand Lodge of Scotland, and Grand Lodge of France. So it was a 3-week activity or something like that with this new jewel that had been really newly found, and that's what the Grandmasters of Michigan today are wearing, not the one that's in the picture that you and I have. Wait, picture at least that I have. Your picture probably has the new one.
Actually, my picture, I was wearing Bob Stevens' jewel.
Well, were you?
For the picture, yep.
Okay.
What are your Masonic mentors?
Needless to say, my parents, all the members of Plymouth Rock Lodge that brought me along the line of getting involved in Grand Lodge, the 2 past Grandmasters that were very active in my upbringing, shall we say, was Don Reno and Dale Edwards. It turns out that the computer that was being used to store all of the records of the members in the Grand Lodge of Michigan was on its last legs. And somehow a committee was formed. I was on the committee, so was David Bedwell, Reno, and Edwards, and I forget a couple of others. And we tried to figure out, well, how shall we do something with all of this data that's on this IBM computer, and what should we do with it? We thought the future was in micros. And we spent many a day traveling over to Grand Rapids, where the Grand Lodge office was then located, to look at the data, to try to figure out how in the world can we do something with this. What kind of computer would we be running this on? What kind of program would we have? And there was some start during that year, but the following year there was a change in leadership, shall we say, and they decided that yes, it was probably a good thing not to have this computer in the Grand Lodge office anymore, but they'd have their own people write the software, and that was the start of the Win Mason that we've had for many years for the secretaries. It was interesting to look at. I remember in particular, Don Van Kirk was a member of 3 different lodges. He had 3 different birth dates, and so he was 3 different people as far as the old data was concerned. My experience in computers, I took the output tape and converted it and used it on a batch of micros and minis that I had access to, and came up with the original data that was in the Grand Lodge data. I would say they were very strong. They were the ones responsible for, you ought to be thinking about becoming more involved than just a person on the sidelines.
What made you decide to run for Grand Lodge?
Well, I think that year of the change in administration had one of the wildest Grand Lodge sessions ever. The people who were supposed to be in charge were out negotiating. I maybe shouldn't say that, but I was at the tape machine. Grand Secretary wasn't there. So I would be bopping up to the microphone every so often saying, would you please restate that motion so I can make sure it's correct for the record? well, this is kind of interesting. And I guess my experience at that time led me to be appointed by Dick Sands, another mentor, to become a Grandmaster's representative, I think we were called. So I was in the first body of Grandmaster's reps. And all along the time of my being that, I still had Edwards, Reno, Bedwell saying, you ought to be more involved. I forget which meeting it was, probably of a Grandmaster's rep meeting, when I called back to Plymouth and said, okay, put my name in, I'll run for Grandmaster. I was the only one that was on the sheet ahead of time. There were 4 candidates on the day of election. One, we were all asked why we would like it. I have no idea what I said. I do remember, though, that one of the other people said, well, I don't want this job, but I certainly didn't want him to run unopposed. If I knew other people were running, I wouldn't have run. What if that guy'd been elected? That's one of the things that I'm really concerned about with our Grand Lodge, and if I could make any kind of recommendations, we need to have some better way of getting people to run for Grand Lodge as opposed to saying, oh, John Doe, why don't you run? Okay, I'll run. And all of a sudden he's on the ballot and nobody knows who in the world he is, what he's done. Sometimes we've lucked out, sometimes we've not. I don't think it should be like other grand jurisdictions that say it is only the past grands that get to nominate who's there. But I do think, and this might get into my next thing or your next question, how long or what did I think of my year as Grandmaster? It was too short. I would have liked to continue on for another year. In fact, I was actively involved, as I think you were, in trying to come up with a 2-year, how to transition to 2-year terms. And that I always thought that maybe what we should do is to have some appointees or nominees or something serve in the lower realms, then go into a pool and be elected from that pool. I don't know where up the line it would be, but that's what I would really state. We need to have people there for a longer period of time. When I got done with that year of Grandmaster and put down what I had done, I could not believe that there were over 400 activities in the 360 or plus or minus a few days that I was Grandmaster. I was a very, shall we say, social one, in that I did a lot of traveling to other grand jurisdictions and found that maybe I shortchanged the lodges in Michigan. In talking to Grandmasters that do have more than a 1-year term, they say, oh yeah, 1 year I visit every lodge in my jurisdiction. The other year I spend visiting all over the place. Many opportunities to visit. It's very interesting to find out what other people are doing.
Mm-hmm. I agree.
And you come back with all sorts of neat ideas, as we have. I think a number of the programs that we have that the Michigan Masonic Charitable Foundation sponsors has come about because of hearing about it at other Grand Lodge sessions or at the Conference of Grandmasters.
So you got elected to Grand Lodge. As you progressed through the Grand Lodge line and later became Grandmaster, what surprised you?
Well, I think the first surprise would be the second year when, can't even think of his name right now. He was the senior Grand Warden, and I was the...
Oh, Bob McClellan.
McClellan. I was sitting next to him, and he said, "Your job is to keep me awake." Dead lousy job. That night he died. We don't play well together at times. During my year, there was some question as to should so-and-so be an officer or not. At times, there was question as to should I really be Grandmaster, or should I be yanked out by one of my predecessors that thought I had done something wrong. It wasn't done something wrong. I hadn't done much, but I knew what my limitations were, and so I didn't do much. We've had some other Grand Lodge sessions that we've had people pulled out. We have had inquiries into the intent of what some people have, and this is a serious position. There are a number have been people who have looked at it as to, here's what my personal gain will be by being Grandmaster. If I get that position, I can force such and such to happen. I guess if I was anything along that line, it was this piece of legislation and this piece of legislation in the Blue Book don't match. How can I get them to match? So during my year, I didn't get much response from jurisprudence when I would say, how can I do that? So I ended up by saying, it is my edict that you disregard this one and go with this one. And later they told me, it is my recommendation that you abide by this one and not that one. And there's a big difference between those two. So while I had 17 edicts that year, about 10 of which were overturned, but the following year there was 10 pieces of legislation that straightened everything back out, I thought. But I think it goes back to that comment I made earlier, that people don't really know what being Grandmaster is all about. And just something, oh, it's an easy job. Nothing to it. We've had people that have lost their wives over it. And I know my wife has said, had I been Grandmaster while I was married to her, I wouldn't be married to her because of all of the stuff that you're doing. There's lots going on. And anybody who is working full-time and trying to be Grandmaster, that's almost an impossibility. Unless you have some very good bosses that say, yeah, we'll give you time off. And I did have good bosses, but I decided that before I got up into the warden's positions, I better retire. So I retired in 99 and wasn't Grandmaster until 03. So I had a shortened process through the line by having a vacancy there with McClellan's death.
I think that was a shock for everybody.
Yes, it was.
What advice would you give somebody that came to you and said, I'm thinking about joining Freemasonry? What would you tell them?
Why? Is it that you want to get something out of it? And I've heard some people that have mentioned to me, oh, I understand that you get better deals with car salesmen and so forth by being a Mason. That by having that Masonic ring or that Masonic pin is going to take care of it. No. What it's going to do is to make you more involved and see things as a more responsible person to the community. I see Masonry as doing a really great job in that regard. So I guess my question would be why? Explain to me why it is that you'd like to become a Mason. And there's been some I just that have done that, and I've just kind of let drift, and others that I've followed up with finding petitions and finding people who they might know that are members. Our ad campaigns of late, I don't know which ones or what we're still doing, but I know it certainly gave my father a shock to see billboards saying,
Share the secret.
share the secret, ask, whatever. That, what are they doing? Is that not violating our rule? Remember, I'd been a Mason a lot earlier had it not been for not knowing what the rule was. And I think we've come a long way, but we've got a ways to go, because we still need people who are honestly committed to this job. And it is a job. When you become the CEO of hundreds of million-dollar organizations, you have a responsibility. You can't think of yourself anymore. You've got to think of the good of the whole and what will be good for everyone. And so some stuff that you may want, just don't do it.
What would you tell somebody that came to you as a first-time worshipful master looking for some advice? What would you tell them?
Plan to go through it a second time to do it right. Because no matter, you are in charge. You are the one that makes all the decisions. I have so many said, well, can I do that? You are the one that can do whatever you want. Yes, you can do it. Now, are you going to do it right? Are you going to do it wrong? Who knows? But give it a try. You can try everything once. And if, I hate to say it, but if the members of the lodge say, we've never done it that way before, then that's a perfectly good reason to say, then it's about time we tried it and see what happens. It might be it works. You might be that, remember, you can't be ousted until your term is over.
That's right. Along those same lines, what would you tell somebody that came to you and said, I'm thinking about running for Grand Lodge?
I started to put together once some material for So You Want to Be Grandmaster, and gave up on it. It's very, very hard. And I'm going to say now, luckily, we're only a one-year term. There's a guy now deceased who was Provincial Grandmaster of Ayrshire, Scotland, that I knew very well, and many of our members knew John Ralston very well. It's a 5-year term there as Grandmaster. Well, it's just a province, yeah, but it's got about 20,000 Masons in that province, and I forget how many lodges. They lodge in just about every little community. After the 5 years, he became past, and after 2 more years, his successor died, and in Scotland, it is the past Provincial Grandmaster that takes over again. So he had 3 more years, so he had a total of 8. My good friend, Robert Stewart, who through trips that Reno and others had, I can't think of
Bedwell
who.
did one, yeah.
Bedwell and from South Carolina.
Oh, Ken Bolton.
Ken Bolton. Through the trips that they had, there was a thing going on between Ayrshire and Michigan, that every other year they'd come one way or the other, and I became good friends with this Bobby Stewart, who at the time was worshipful master of his lodge. And, I've since been back and forth a number of times. He and his wife were at our wedding. We were at his daughter's wedding this past February in Scotland. And For 5 years, he was provincial Grand Secretary. And when asked, would you do it again? He didn't have a chance to say anything. Heather answered for him, absolutely not. So they now have him as, what is it, pro tem or something like that, provincial grandmaster. So who knows, he may be a grandmaster, provincial grandmaster in a few years also. If you find that the activities going on with the local lodge are something that you like, then Grand Lodge might be something to look into. But I really think you need to have some experience on the committees and so forth of Grand Lodge before getting into the line. I served as Worshipful Master both in 1980 and 1990. And in 1980, I was the first one in, I think it was since 1910, that there had been a repeat. And lodges now have repeats all the time, so I was the first one in 1990. Grand Lodge is a very tough job, and I commend those people who have done it.
How has Masonry impacted your life?
I think it gives me a different outlook. I've had lots and lots of different outlooks over times because of different experiences of being president of this, that, or the other thing, but I think Masonry has said that you owe something to the community, you owe something to the group. It's a it's hard to answer. How has it? It's something I enjoy participating in. I don't participate as much anymore, mainly because I have a wife. And it's not so much that she says, no, you can't. It's just, I like to be with her.
Any final reflections on the fraternity?
No. I've enjoyed every minute of it. I've enjoyed, I don't know if I mentioned it earlier, but my father, on the day that we're doing this taping, is celebrating his 99th birthday. He's 75 years a Mason. He thoroughly enjoys the fellowship of the men when they come out to see him at the home he's at. He's in an independent living place. I guess I just need to get more involved in things.
Well, give your dad my best. He's a great guy.
Thank you.
Larry, thank you very much for being with us today
Thank
and
you.
participating in our oral histories.
Good.